What would you do if you had exactly $5 and a single sandwich left to your name? I chose to give mine to a dying stranger, fully expecting to starve in the snow. I never imagined that $2 loaf of bread was my ticket to a $40 billion empire. But to claim it, I had to execute a blood contract and destroy the man who stole my freedom. The prey had become the hunter. My name is Charles Garcia. I am 38 years old, and until recently, I was the man who designed skylines. Now I am just another piece of debris blown into the corner of a derelict bus stop on the outskirts of Chicago. The structure offers little protection against the mid-February gale that screams across Lake Michigan, carrying with it ice crystals, sharp enough to flay skin. My fingers wrapped in fingerless wool gloves that I scavenged from a dumpster behind a Salvation Army are currently turning a shade of blue that I used to specify for tempered glass facades. I know architecture, I know structure, and I know exactly when a load-bearing wall is about to give way. Right now, looking at my own life, the foundation has not just cracked, it has pulverized into dust. To understand the depth of this freeze, you have to understand the height of the fall. 18 months ago, I was not huddled under a discarded tarp smelling of mildew and diesel fumes. I was standing in a climate-controlled boardroom on the 45th floor of the Vance and Partners Tower, toasting with crystal flutes of champagne. I was the golden boy, the visionary, the genius behind the Green City Project, an architectural marvel designed to integrate vertical forests with sustainable urban living. Beside me stood Richard Vance. We had been friends since our first year of architecture school. We had starved together, dreamed together, and built a firm from the ground up. Or so I thought. The betrayal was not sudden. It was a slow, calculated demolition. Richard did not just want the credit for Green City. He wanted the patent, the billions in government grants, and total control. To get it, he needed me gone. Not just fired, but erased. The frame job was a masterpiece of corporate malice. Suddenly, millions of dollars in company funds were traced to offshore accounts under my name. My digital signature was on unauthorized transfers. My blueprints were found on the servers of rival firms. I could have fought Richard. I knew his sloppy coding. I knew his tell when he lied. But I could not fight Elena. Elena. Even now, shivering in this frozen hell, the thought of her burns hotter than any fire. She was my fiancée. We were to be married in the spring. But when the gavel banged down in that sterile courtroom, she did not stand by me. She walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood floor, and looked straight at the jury. She told them with tears in her beautiful eyes that she had seen me forging the documents. She told them I had become unstable, greedy, and dangerous. Her testimony was the final nail. Richard got the company. Elena got Richard. And I got 2 years in a minimum security facility that felt like a vacation compared to the reality awaiting me upon release. When I walked out of prison, I was a pariah. My license was revoked. My accounts were frozen. My name was synonymous with corporate theft. No firm would hire me to sweep their floors, let alone draw a line on a blueprint. I drifted from the city center to the fringes, shedding parts of my humanity with every mile. I learned that hunger is not a feeling. It is a creature that lives in your gut and eats you from the inside out. I learned that the world does not hate the poor. It simply refuses to see them. To the commuters in their warm cars, I am not Charles Garcia, the architect. I am static. I am background noise. I am a stain on the sidewalk that they step over without breaking stride. Tonight was particularly brutal. I had spent 12 hours working an off-the-books construction job hauling bags of cement up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. The foreman had promised me $50. When the job was done, he laughed and tossed a $20 bill on the ground, telling me to take it, or he would call the cops. I took it. I had no leverage. Dignity is expensive, and I was overdrawn. On my way back to this godforsaken shelter, 3 teenagers drunk on cheap vodka and entitlement decided I looked like a good target practice. They kicked me until I curled into a ball, laughing about how I smelled. They broke my nose, took the $20, and left me bleeding in the slush. I did not fight back. I just covered my head and waited for it to end. That is the rule of the street. You endure, you survive. You do not escalate. But rules change when you see someone weaker than you facing the abyss. I was limping through a narrow alleyway trying to keep out of the biting wind when I heard the sound. It was the sickening thud of a boot hitting soft tissue. I peered around a dumpster and saw them. A different group of kids, maybe 5 of them, surrounding a heap of rags against the brick wall. The heap of rags was a man. We call him Old Ben. I do not know his real name nor his history. On the streets, we do not ask for resumes. Ben is frail, his mind wandering in and out of a reality that only he can see. He talks to pigeons. He sings lullabies to empty bottles. He is harmless, the kind of harmless that should invite pity, not violence. But tonight, the wolves were out. "Give us the blanket, old man," one of the punks sneered, trying to rip the tattered wool from Ben's gripping hands. "No, please, Ben," wheezed his voice, barely a rattle. "It is cold. Please." The leader of the pack laughed and stomped on Ben's hand. Ben screamed, a thin, high sound that cut through the wind. My body screamed at me to keep walking. My ribs were already bruising from my own beating. My head was pounding. I had nothing to gain and everything to lose, including my life. I was a disgraced architect, a felon, a ghost. Why should I care? But I looked at the architecture of the scene, the angles of violence, the weight distribution of cruelty, and I realized that if I walked away, the last pillar of my soul would collapse. I would truly be the empty shell Richard said I was. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking from the dry, cold air. The group turned. 5 pairs of eyes assessed me. They saw a tall man, yes, but a broken one. A scarecrow in a dirty coat. "Leave him alone," I said, stepping into the sparse light of a flickering street lamp. "Or what?" the leader challenged, stepping over Ben's prone form. "You want to join the party trash?" I did not have a weapon. I did not have the strength of a hero in a movie. I just had rage. A deep, molten core of rage that had been solidifying for 18 months. I charged. It was not a graceful fight. It was a brawl in the mud. I tackled the leader, driving my shoulder into his gut. We went down hard on the ice. I managed to land one solid punch to his jaw, feeling the satisfying crunch of contact before the others swarmed me. Blows rained down on my back, my head, my legs. I curled around trying to protect my vitals, but mostly trying to draw their fire away from Ben. I heard a rib snap, a sharp electric jolt of pain that stole my breath. I gasped, tasting copper. They kicked me until they got bored, or perhaps until the cold became too much for them. "Let's go," one of them spat. "He is not worth the effort." They left, laughing, their voices fading into the roar of the wind. I lay there for a long time, staring at the dirty snow, waiting for the world to stop spinning. Pain was now my entire universe. "Are you alive?" a trembling voice asked. I rolled over, groaning. Old Ben was crawling toward me. His face was a map of grime and wrinkles, his eyes wide with shock. "I think so," I grunted, pushing myself up. The world tilted, but I stayed upright. I checked Ben. He was shaken, bruised, but no bone seemed broken. They had not gotten his blanket. "Come on," I said, grabbing his arm. "You cannot stay here. You will freeze." We moved like 2 wounded insects across the frozen pavement. It took us an hour to walk 4 blocks to the bus stop I called home. It was not much, just 3 glass walls and a roof, but I had rigged up layers of cardboard and plastic sheeting to trap body heat. It was 10 degrees warmer than the outside, which meant it was survivable. I helped Ben sit down on my pile of newspapers. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering like a snare drum. Hypothermia was setting in. I could see the glaze in his eyes. I had 1 can of soup left, a dented tin of chicken noodle that I had been saving for 2 days. It was my emergency ration. My only food. I looked at the can, then at Ben. I pulled out a small camping stove, a rusted thing I found in a junkyard, and lit the last of my solid fuel tablet. I heated the soup until it bubbled. Drink, I ordered, handing him the tin. He looked at me, his hands shaking so hard he spilled a little. You? He asked. I am not hungry, I lied. My stomach roared in protest, a hollow ache that cramped my muscles. Ben drank. He drank greedily, the warmth bringing a flush of color back to his gray cheeks. When he finished, he licked the rim of the can. He was still shivering. The blanket he fought for was wet and useless. I sighed. I stood up and unzipped my coat. It was a heavy parka, stained and patched with duct tape, but it was down-filled. It was the only barrier between me and the death that waited in the wind. Here, I said, draping it over his shoulders. He tried to push it away. No, you will die. Take it, I snapped, tucking the edges around him. You are older, your blood is thinner. Blood is... I can take the cold. This was another lie. No one can take this cold. I sat down next to him, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. The wind found the gaps in my sweater immediately. My teeth began to chatter. Ben stared at me for a long time. The street lamp outside cast long, dancing shadows across his face. Why? He asked softly. I looked at him, confused by the question. Why what? Why save a useless old man like me? He whispered. You have nothing. You are starving, you are beaten. Yet you fight for me, you give me your food. You give me your coat. Why? I looked out at the swirling snow. I thought about the 45th floor. I thought about the lies Elena told. I thought about the millions of dollars Richard was making off my genius while I rotted here. They had taken my money. They had taken my reputation. They had taken my love. They had taken my future. I turned to Ben. My rib throbbed in time with my heartbeat. Because dignity is the only thing they cannot repossess from me, I said. My voice was steady, despite the cold. If I let you die, I become what they say I am. A nothing. As long as I can choose to be human, I am still Charles Garcia. Ben did not speak. He just looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. His eyes, usually cloudy and vacant, seemed suddenly sharp, almost piercing. He reached out a gnarled hand and patted my knee. Get some sleep, Charles, he said. You have a big day tomorrow. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Yeah, big day. Lots of cans to find. I leaned my head back against the cold glass. The pain in my side was a dull roar now. Exhaustion pulled at my eyelids. I drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of towers made of ice that shattered whenever I tried to climb them. When I woke up, the light was gray and harsh. The storm had passed, leaving the city buried under a foot of pristine white snow. I sat up with a gasp. The cold had settled into my bones like lead. I looked around. Ben. He was gone. My heart sank. Had he wandered off? Had he died in the night and been taken by the sanitation crew? I looked down at where he had been sleeping. My parka was folded neatly, resting on the newspaper. It had been dry cleaned. I blinked. That was impossible. I touched the fabric. It was my coat. The same stains, the same tape, but it was folded with military precision. Resting on top of the coat were two items that did not belong in a bus stop. The first was a business card. It was heavy, made of black metal with edges so sharp they could cut paper. Embossed in the center in gold lettering was a single name, Benjamin Sterling. Below it, a phone number. I stared at it. Benjamin Sterling. The Benjamin Sterling? The recluse billionaire owner of Sterling Dynamics? The man whose energy empire rivaled the GDP of small countries. I turned the card over. On the back, handwritten in elegant silver ink, was a note for the soup and the dignity. The second item was a key. A simple brass key with a plastic tag. The tag read, Union Station, Locker 888. I sat there, the wind whistling through the cracks, holding the key in one frozen hand and the card in the other. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Old Ben, the homeless man I had saved from a beating, the man I had fed my last meal. I stood up. The pain in my rib was still there, but suddenly the cold did not feel quite so biting. I put on my coat. It smelled faintly of lavender and expensive cologne. I stepped out of the shelter and looked toward the city center. The skyscrapers pierced the gray sky like jagged teeth. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, a game had started. I did not know the rules yet. I did not know the stakes. But as I gripped the brass key in my pocket, I knew one thing for certain. Charles Garcia was done hiding. The walk to Union Station was a pilgrimage through a frozen purgatory. My ribs screamed with every step, a sharp reminder of the previous night's brutality, but the brass key in my pocket felt heavy like a loaded gun. I kept my hand wrapped around it, terrifyingly afraid that if I let go, I would wake up back in the bus shelter with nothing but the wind for company. The great hall of the station was a cavern of limestone and marble, a Beaux-Arts masterpiece that usually made my architect's heart ache with jealousy. Today, however, I did not look at the vaulted ceilings or the Corinthian columns. I looked only at the numbers painted on the metal banks of lockers lining the far corridor. I found it in a dim corner away from the rush of commuters and the smell of overpriced coffee. Locker 888, the number of fortune. The irony was thick enough to choke on. My hands trembled, not from the cold this time, but from a cocktail of adrenaline and dread, as I slid the key into the cylinder. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. The door swung open. Inside, the locker was almost empty. There were no bags of money, no gold bars. There was only a thick manila envelope and a sleek, brand-new tablet device resting on top of it. I picked up the tablet. It was heavy, expensive. As soon as my thumb brushed the screen, it flared to life. There was no passcode. A video file opened automatically, filling the high-resolution display with a face I knew yet did not know. It was old Ben, but the grime was gone. The matted gray hair was trimmed into a sharp, distinguished style. The rags were replaced by a charcoal three-piece suit that I recognized as bespoke Italian tailoring. He sat in a leather wingback chair in front of a roaring fireplace, holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked powerful. He looked like a titan. "Hello, Charles," the man in the video said. His voice was strong, resonant, stripped of the wheezing rattle I had heard in the alley. "If you are watching this, two things have happened. First, you passed the test. Second, I am dead." I nearly dropped the device. People rushed past me dragging suitcases, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside my skull. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he continued, leaning forward. "I am not a homeless beggar named Ben. My name is Benjamin Sterling." I stopped, breathing. Benjamin Sterling, the chairman of Sterling Dynamics, the leviathan of the energy sector, the man who had been Richard Vance's sworn enemy for a decade. Richard hated Sterling with a passion that bordered on obsession, mostly because Sterling Dynamics consistently outbid Vance and partners on every major infrastructure contract in the Midwest. "I have pancreatic cancer," Charles Sterling said, his eyes drilling into mine through the screen. "Stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months. I have no wife, I have no children. My board of directors is a shark tank of sycophants who would strip my company for parts before my body was even cold. I needed an heir, but I did not want a businessman. I wanted a human being." He took a sip of his drink, a melancholy smile playing on his lips. "I spent the last 6 months on the streets living among the invisible people. I wanted to see if there was anyone left in this city who possessed a heart that had not been rusted shut by greed. I was looking for kindness when there was no profit to be made. I was spat on. I was ignored. I was beaten. Until last night." The video cut to a shaky angle, clearly filmed from a hidden camera on his person. I saw myself, bloody and desperate, handing him the soup. I heard my own voice saying, "Because dignity is the only thing they cannot repossess." "You gave me your last meal, Charles. You gave me the coat off your back to keep a dying old man warm, knowing it might cost you your life. That is leadership. That is the fire I want guarding my legacy." The screen went black for a second, then displayed an address in the financial district and a time code. "Report immediately." I grabbed the envelope and the tablet. I ran. I did not care that I looked like a deranged vagrant. I did not care that my boots were leaving slush on the pristine marble floors. I pushed through the revolving doors and hailed a cab. The driver took one look at me and started to roll up his window. I slammed a $100 bill, found inside the envelope against the glass. He unlocked the door. The headquarters of Sterling Dynamics was a fortress of steel and glass that pierced the clouds. When I arrived, the security guards in the lobby stepped forward to intercept me, their hands hovering over their tasers. Before they could touch me, the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby slid open. A tall, severe-looking man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped out. He wore a mourning pin on his lapel. "Mr. Garcia," the man said. His voice cut through the murmur of the lobby like a scalpel. "We have been expecting you." The guards froze. I straightened my spine, trying to summon the ghost of the man I used to be. "I am here to see." I paused. "I am here. I am James Blackwood, Chief Legal Counsel for the Sterling Estate," he said, gesturing for me to follow. "Please. We do not have much time." The elevator ride to the penthouse was silent. The numbers on the display climbed higher and higher, surpassing the 45th floor, where my life had fallen apart, going all the way to the 70th. When the doors opened, I stepped into a sanctuary. The office was vast, lined with mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I had once helped build. But the room was somber. Staff members were moving quietly, covering mirrors and speaking in hushed tones. "Mr. Sterling passed away exactly 2 hours ago," Blackwood said, leading me to a massive oak desk. "He died peacefully. He was waiting for the notification that the locker had been opened. Once he knew you had the key, he let go." I felt a sudden crushing weight in my chest. The soup, the coat. It had been his final act. He had held on just long enough to find me. Blackwood picked up a thick document, bound in leather. "This is the last will and testament of Benjamin Sterling. It is ironclad. It contests all previous claims and bypasses the board of directors completely." He opened the document and pushed it toward me. "Mr. Sterling has left you everything, Charles. His personal real estate portfolio, his art collection, and his 51% controlling stake in Sterling Dynamics." I stared at the lawyer. I could not process the scale of it. "What is the valuation?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Including the liquid assets and the current stock valuation," Blackwood said without blinking. "The total estate is valued at approximately $40 billion. $40 billion! The number hung in the air, abstract and terrifying. I was a man who had fought for a $2 sandwich yesterday. Today I owned an empire. But Blackwood added, his tone hardening. "There is a condition. A single stipulation that you must fulfill to inherit the estate. If you refuse, the assets will be liquidated and donated to charity, and you will return to the street." I looked at the document. "What is the condition?" Blackwood pressed a button on a remote. A projection screen descended from the ceiling. An architectural rendering appeared. It was a twisting, shimmering tower of glass, soaring higher than anything else in the New York skyline. "You must complete Mr. Sterling's final project," Blackwood said. "He called it his unfinished business. He wants you to destroy the Millennium Tower." I froze. I knew that tower. I knew every curve, every load-bearing column, every wind shear calculation. "That is not the Millennium Tower," I whispered, stepping closer to the screen. That is the Green City Project. That is my design. It was. It was the masterpiece Richard Vance had stolen from me. He had renamed it, rebranded it, and claimed it as his own magnum opus. Seeing it there, projected in the office of my enemy's rival, made the bile rise in my throat. Mr. Sterling knew, Blackwood said. He had been investigating Vance and Partners for years. He knew Richard Vance stole the design, but he also discovered something else, something far worse than plagiarism. Blackwood handed me a file. I opened it. Inside were material invoices, stress test reports, and supplier emails. As I read them, my architect's brain began to scream. This cannot be right, I muttered, flipping through the pages. The steel grade he switched from high tensile alloy to grade C recycled steel. And the concrete mixture he reduced the curing time by 40%? It got worse. The fire suppression system had been downgraded to a budget model that was illegal in high-rises over 50 stories. The damper system, meant to counteract wind sway, had been replaced with a cheaper static counterweight. He gutted it, I said, feeling sick. Richard did not just steal the design. He hollowed it out to maximize his profit margin. If a storm hits that tower, it will collapse. Blackwood finished for me. It is a coffin, Mr. Garcia. A skyscraper coffin. Richard Vance is rushing construction to meet a deadline for the World Trade Summit next month. He is going to pack that building with dignitaries, politicians, and innocent people. And when the autumn winds hit, thousands will die. I looked at the rendering of the tower. It was beautiful on the outside, a gleaming needle of ambition. But inside it was rotten. Just like Richard. Just like Elena. Mr. Sterling tried to expose him, Blackwood explained. But Vance has the city inspectors in his pocket. He has buried the evidence deep. We need someone who understands the structure from the inside out. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried because he drew the map. I looked down at my hands. They were scarred, dirty, and shaking. But for the first time in 2 years, they did not feel useless. So the condition, I said, looking up at Blackwood. Is it to stop him? The condition is to destroy him, Blackwood corrected. To dismantle his reputation, bankrupt his company, and ensure that Tower never opens. Mr. Sterling gave you a sword, Charles. He expects you to swing it. I walked over to the window. Far below, the city moved like a living organism. Somewhere out there, Richard Vance was probably drinking scotch, laughing about his brilliance, thinking I was dead, or rotting in a gutter. Somewhere out there, Elena was planning a wedding paid for with the money they stole from my life. They thought I was gone. They thought I was debris. I turned back to the desk. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. The ink was black. I will need a haircut, I said, and a tailor, and access to the corporate archives. Blackwood allowed himself a small, rare smile. It is all arranged. The team is on standby. I signed my name at the bottom of the document. The stroke of the pen felt like slashing a knife through canvas. Charles Garcia, the victim, died in that room. In his place, something else was born. Something colder, something harder. Welcome back to the land of the living, Mr. Garcia, Blackwood said, closing the folder. Or should I say, Mr. Chairman? I looked at the projection of the Millennium Tower one last time. Do not call me Charles, I said. Charles was a naive architect who believed in justice. If I am going to war with Richard Vance, I cannot be the man he defeated. I remembered the fake name on the passport in the envelope Blackwood had shown me earlier, a cover identity Sterling had prepared for his heir. Call me Carlos, I said. Carlos de Luca. The game had begun. And this time, I was not playing for survival. I was playing for blood. The transformation did not happen in a day. It was a violent, methodical excavation of the man I used to be. For 2 weeks, I disappeared into a private wing of the Sterling estate in the Hamptons, a fortress of solitude where money flowed like water, and silence was the only music. The team James Blackwood assembled was not a beauty squad. They were architects of identity. They did not just cut my hair, they redesigned my silhouette. The first step was stripping away the physical evidence of my poverty. A team of dentists worked for 3 days to repair the damage malnutrition had done to my teeth, replacing chips and whitening the enamel until my smile was a weapon of blinding porcelain. A dermatologist erased the frostbite scars on my cheeks with laser treatments that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. My hair, long and matted from months on the street, was sheared, close-styled, into a sharp European undercut that accentuated the hard angles of my jaw. Then came the wardrobe. I stood for hours while Italian tailors measured every inch of my body, draping me in fabrics that whispered of power. Vicuna wool, Egyptian cotton, bespoke silk. When I put on the first suit, a midnight blue 3-piece cut to perfection, I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the reflection. Charles Garcia, the broken man shivering in a bus stop, was gone. Staring back at me was a shark. But the physical change was the easy part. The psychological reprogramming was brutal. I had to learn to walk again. Not the shuffle of the homeless, trying to be invisible, but the stride of a man who owns the pavement. I had to learn to speak again, dropping the hesitation in my voice, replacing it with the clipped authoritative cadence of old money. My name is Carlos De Luca. I practiced over and over, staring into the mirror. I am a private equity investor from Milan. My interests are sustainable energy and distressed assets. Blackwood drilled me on the backstory until I could recite it in my sleep. Carlos De Luca was a recluse, the scion of a fading European aristocracy, who had turned the family fortune into a modern financial empire. He was eccentric, ruthless, and utterly fabricated by the sterling intelligence team. I studied the portfolio, the fake history, the nuances of the European markets. I absorbed it all, because I knew that one slip, one moment of hesitation would expose the imposter beneath the silk tie. On the 10th day, Blackwood brought me a gift, or rather a weapon. He opened the heavy oak doors of the library and ushered in a woman. She was petite, with sharp features, and eyes that held a mixture of exhaustion and fury. I knew her immediately. Sarah. I said, my voice testing the new lower register I had been practicing. She stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open. Charles? Sarah was Richard Vance's executive assistant for 5 years. She knew where the bodies were buried because she had typed the coordinates. She had been the gatekeeper, the loyal soldier. Seeing her here, looking pale and nervous, told me everything I needed to know about Richard's current state. She is on our payroll now, Blackwood said, pouring a drink. Richard fired her 3 weeks ago. Apparently, she asked too many questions about the concrete invoices. Sarah walked toward me, touching the lapel of my jacket, as if to confirm I was real. He set you up, Charles, she whispered. I know that now. I tried to find the original files to prove it, but he deleted everything from the main server. When I confronted him, he had security throw me out. He blacklisted me. I cannot get a job in this city. I looked at her. I saw the same anger in her eyes that burned in my gut. We were both casualties of the same war. I do not need the original files to destroy him, Sarah, I said. I need to know where he is weak, right now. She took a deep breath, composing herself. He is drowning, Charles. The Millennium Tower is a money pit. He is leveraged to the hilt. He has taken loans from 3 major banks and borrowed against his personal assets. If the tower is not completed and fully leased by next quarter, the banks will call in the loans. He will be insolvent. And the construction? I asked. She hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from her purse. It is worse than we thought. He is not just using cheap steel. I found emails between Richard and the chief city inspector. He is paying bribes to overlook cracks in the foundation. The piling depth is 20% short of the safety requirement. If that building sways in a high wind, the torque will shear the base. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Richard was not just a thief. He was building a mass grave. He is planning a gala, Sarah continued. An engagement party. He is going to propose to Elena on the rooftop of the unfinished tower in 2 weeks. He wants to show the world that the building is safe, that he is the king of New York. He is spending $2 million on the party alone, money he does not have. Elena. The name landed like a physical blow. She was going to marry him on top of the structure he stole from me paid for, with the ruin of my life. Blackwood looked at me. We can leak the bribery info to the press now. Stop the construction immediately. No, I said, turning to the window. If we stop him now, he might wiggle out of it. He will blame the contractors. He will settle out of court. He will survive. I turned back to them, the plan crystallizing in my mind. We let him build it. We let him climb all the way to the top. We let him think he has won. And then, when he is standing at the edge of his triumph, we push him off. I looked at Sarah. I want you to go back to the city. Use your old contacts. Find out who holds his highest interest debt. I looked at Blackwood. Start buying. I want to own Richard's debt. Use shell companies. Break it up so he does not see it coming. By the time he realizes what is happening, I want to own the mortgage on his soul. The next few days were a blur of high-stakes finance. Operating from the shadows, the Sterling team began to acquire the distressed loans of Vance and Partners. We bought the notes from nervous banks, from private lenders, from construction unions. Piece by piece, the financial ground beneath Richard's feet became my property. But I needed to see them. I needed to test the disguise. The opportunity came in the form of the St. Jude's charity auction, a black-tie event attended by the city's elite. Richard and Elena were on the guest list. I arrived in a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, flanked by 2 bodyguards. When I stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs blinded me. I did not smile. I did not wave. I walked with the arrogance of a man who could buy the building we were entering. "Who is that?" I heard a photographer shout. "That is Carlos De Luca," another replied. "The European investor." I moved through the ballroom, a shark in a sea of tropical fish. I shook hands, spoke in guarded metaphors, and sipped sparkling water. Then I saw them. Richard stood near the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne, laughing too loudly. He looked older, tired. The stress was etching lines around his eyes. Beside him was Elena. She was breathtaking in a gown of emerald silk, but she looked brittle. Her smile did not reach her eyes. She was scanning the room, her gaze restless, as if she were looking for an exit. I maneuvered myself so I would cross their path. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitor in my chest, but my face remained a mask of stone. I walked past them, close enough to smell her perfume. Jasmine and sandalwood, the same scent she wore the day I proposed. Elena froze, her eyes locked onto my profile. I felt her gaze burn into the side of my face. She gasped a small, sharp intake of breath. "Charles?" she whispered, barely audible over the music. Richard turned. "What?" I did not stop. I did not look at them. I let my eyes slide over them as if they were furniture. I continued walking, engaging a senator in conversation about renewable energy subsidies. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw Elena grab Richard's arm. She was pale, shaking. "I just saw him," she hissed. "I saw Charles." "You are crazy," Richard snapped, taking a gulp of his drink. "Charles is gone, Elena. He is probably dead in a ditch somewhere. Stop being paranoid." But she kept staring at my back. I could feel the fear radiating from her. It was delicious. I left the party 10 minutes later, leaving a ripple of whispers in my wake. The seed was planted. Elena was haunted. Richard was dismissive. They were divided. Back at the penthouse, Sarah was waiting with a dossier. "We have a problem," she said. "Or an opportunity. Richard is running out of cash for the final glass installation. The suppliers have cut him off. He needs $200 million by Friday, or the construction stops and he misses his summit deadline. No bank will touch him." I smiled. It was the opening I had been waiting for. "He needs a savior," I said. I picked up the phone and dialed Blackwood. "Prepare the paperwork," I said. The DeLuca Fund is looking for a high-risk investment. We are going to offer Richard Vance a lifeline. But it is a trap, Sarah said, understanding dawning on her face. It is a noose, I corrected. We are going to lend him the money, but the collateral will be the tower itself. If he misses a single milestone, if he is late by 1 hour, we take everything. I walked to the window, looking out at the skyline, where the skeleton of the Millennium Tower clawed at the night sky. He thinks he is building a monument, I whispered. He is building his own prison, and I am going to be the warden. The transformation was complete. Charles Garcia was a memory. Carlos DeLuca was the reality. And Richard Vance was about to shake the hand of the devil, thinking it was the hand of God. Desperation has a scent. It smells like stale sweat masked by too much cologne, mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline. As I sat in the private alcove of Le Bernardin, waiting for the man who had ruined my life, I could practically taste his desperation in the air. The restaurant was a temple of seafood and silence where waiters moved like ghosts, and deals were whispered over plates of hamachi and black truffle. I was no longer Charles Garcia, the starving architect. I was Carlos DeLuca, the savior, the shark, the Trojan horse. My reflection in the darkened window showed a stranger. The beard I had grown was manicured to a razor-sharp point, darkening my jawline. My hair was slicked back, revealing a forehead that I usually kept covered. The tinted glasses I wore were not just a fashion statement. They were a shield hiding the only part of me that surgery and acting lessons could not fully change: my eyes. Richard Vance arrived 12 minutes late. It was a power move, or perhaps just the result of a chaotic schedule. But it had no effect on me. I remained seated, sipping my sparkling water, checking the time on my Patek Philippe with deliberate boredom. Mr. DeLuca Richard said, rushing to the table. He was breathless. His suit was expensive, but it hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. His eyes darted around the room as if he expected creditors to jump out from behind the curtains. So sorry to keep you waiting. Traffic in Midtown is a nightmare. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my jacket. I did not smile. In Europe, we consider punctuality a virtue, Mr. Vance. I said, my voice dropped an octave, heavily accented with a rhythmic Italian cadence. But for a man building the future of New York, I suppose time is relative. Richard laughed, a nervous braying sound. Beside him stood Elena. If Richard looked haggard, Elena looked haunted. She wore a dress that cost more than the house I grew up in, but she wore it like armor. Her makeup was flawless, yet it could not hide the tightness around her mouth or the restless energy in her hands. When our eyes met, she flinched. It was subtle, a microscopic widening of the pupils, but I saw it. She sensed something. Not a recognition of my face, but a vibration, a ghost passing through the room. And this must be the lovely fiancé, I said, taking her hand. I did not kiss it. I bowed slightly, keeping a respectful distance. Elena, Richard said, nudging her. This is Mr. DeLuca, the investor I told you about. Nice to meet you, she whispered. Her hand was cold in mine. She pulled it away quickly, rubbing her skin as if she had been burned. Please sit, I said, gesturing to the velvet banquette. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I ordered for the table, choosing dishes that were complex and intimidating, asserting control over their palates, before I asserted control over their bank accounts. Richard drank his wine too fast. He was eager to get to the business, to the lifeline I was dangling. I have reviewed the portfolio for the Millennium Tower, I said, cutting into a scallop. It is ambitious. It is revolutionary, Richard corrected, leaning forward. The first of its kind. A vertical ecosystem. Yes, I said, pausing to wipe my mouth. The atrium design on the 40th floor. The way you utilize the Venturi effect to accelerate natural airflow and reduce cooling costs by 30%. Brilliant. Most architects would have relied on industrial HVAC systems, but you chose to let the building breathe. Richard froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. The Venturi effect detail was not in the public prospectus. It was a specific technical nuance I had agonized over in my original sketches, a detail I had debated with myself at 3 in the morning in our old studio. Richard had called it unnecessary back then. He did not understand the physics of it. Yes, Richard stammered, his smile faltering. Well, we wanted to push the boundaries of sustainability. And the cantilevered observation deck, I continued pressing harder. The structural load is distributed through the internal core, rather than external bracing. A risky choice, Mr. Vance. It requires a specific grade of high-tensile steel. I assume you adhered strictly to those specifications. Richard choked on his wine. He coughed violently, grabbing his napkin. Elena stared at him, then at me. Her eyes narrowed. She was not looking at a stranger anymore. She was looking at a puzzle. Of course, Richard wheezed, his face red. Safety is our top priority. We spared no expense. Liar. I knew for a fact he had swapped the high-tensile alloy for cheap imports to save $4 million. I nodded slowly, as if impressed. Good, I said. Because the DeLuca Fund does not invest in buildings that fall down. We invest in legacies. I signaled to my assistant, who was waiting in the shadows. He brought over a leather folder and placed it on the table. $200 million, I said softly. The number hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the conversation. Richard stopped coughing. He stared at the folder like a starving wolf staring at a lamb. This covers your completion cost, your marketing budget, and your outstanding liabilities with the unions, I explained. It clears the path for your grand opening. Richard reached for the folder, his hands trembling. Where do I sign? Read it first, Richard, Elena said sharply. Her voice was tight. It sounds too good to be true. I turned my gaze to her. She was sharp. She always had been. That was what I had loved about her. That was what had destroyed me. Your fiancée is prudent, I said. She is right. There are conditions. I opened the folder to the final page. The interest rate is standard, I said. However, there is a performance clause. The DeLuca Fund requires absolute certainty. The Millennium Tower must open on the scheduled date. If the project is delayed by even 24 hours, if the ribbon is not cut on the agreed morning, the loan is considered in default. And if we default? Richard asked, his eyes still glued to the check attached to the front page. Then the collateral is forfeited, I said. What is the collateral? Elena asked. I smiled, a thin, cold expression. The tower itself, the land, and the intellectual property rights to the design, Elena gasped. You want the whole company. Only if you fail, I said, leaning back. But surely, Mr. Vance, with your genius, with your strict adherence to safety protocols, you will not fail. You are the architect of the century, are you not? I was baiting his ego. I was challenging his narcissism. Richard Vance could not admit to weakness. He could not admit that his timeline was impossible. Richard slammed his hand on the table. We will not fail. We are ahead of schedule. Richard. No, Elena warned. It is too risky. I can handle it, Elena, he snapped at her, his facade cracking. Do you want to cancel the wedding? Do you want the banks to seize your jewelry? Because that is what happens if we do not get this money. He grabbed a pen. He did not even read the fine print. He did not see the clauses about supply chain audits or independent structural reviews. He just saw the zeros. He signed his name with a flourish. Richard Vance. I watched the ink dry. It was done. He had just signed his death warrant. Excellent, I said, closing the folder and handing it to my assistant. The funds will be wired to your operating account tomorrow morning. Richard slumped back in his chair, looking like a man who had just run a marathon. He poured himself another glass of wine, his hands shaking less now. To celebrate our partnership, I said, reaching under the table, I have brought you a gift. I pulled out a flat, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. I slid it across the pristine white tablecloth. "I am an avid collector of art," I said. "When I saw this piece in a gallery in Soho, I immediately thought of you, Richard. It captures the essence of modern business, the complexity of relationships." Richard tore off the paper. It was a small oil painting, dark and violent. The style was abstract expressionism, swirling with reds and blacks. But the subject was undeniable. It depicted two figures, standing in an embrace. One figure was smiling. The other was driving a long, jagged knife into the first figure's back. The title, scrawled in the angry charcoal at the bottom, read, "The Cost of Ambition." The table went silent. Richard stared at the painting, his smile frozen in a rictus of confusion and distaste. "It is interesting," he managed to say. "Very visceral." "It reminds me that in our world, trust is a currency," I said, staring straight into his eyes. "And some people spend it all in one place." Elena made a noise in her throat, a choked sound of revulsion. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to use the powder room," she muttered, not looking at anyone. She grabbed her clutch and hurried away. Richard was too busy admiring the check to notice her distress. I gave him a few moments, then stood up. "If you will excuse me," I said. I walked toward the restrooms. The corridor was lined with mirrors reflecting my new face, my expensive suit. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The trap was set. Now I just had to spring it. I entered the men's restroom. It was empty, a sanctuary of black marble and gold fixtures. I moved to the sink and turned on the tap, letting the cold water run over my wrists to calm my pulse. The door behind me opened. I expected another patron. Instead, I saw a flash of emerald green in the mirror. Elena slipped inside and locked the door behind her. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. Her eyes were wild, frantic. "This is the men's room, Signora," I said, not turning around. I kept my voice calm, maintaining the accent. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop the accent! Stop the acting!" She rushed forward, grabbing my arm and spinning me around. We were inches apart. I could see the fine lines of terror around her eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded. I removed my sunglasses slowly, revealing my eyes. They were the one thing I could not change. The same dark brown eyes that had looked at her with love for 5 years. Now they were flat. Dead. "I am Carlos de Luca," I said. "Perhaps you have had too much wine, Mrs. Vance? Don't lie to me," she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble tiles. "You know about the Venturi effect. You know about the internal core. Richard does not know those things. He never understood the engineering. Only one person talked about the building like that." "Only one person?" She reached up her hands, trembling as if to touch my face, to feel the bone structure beneath the beard. "It is you, isn't it?" she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Charles? Oh God, Charles, you are alive!" I looked at her. I saw the woman who had promised to love me forever. I saw the woman who had stood on a witness stand and sent me to hell. I felt a flicker of the old pain, a ghost of the love I once had, but I crushed it instantly. I grabbed her wrists and removed her hands from my person. My grip was firm, bordering on painful. "Signora," I said, my voice ice cold, "I do not know who this Charles is. But if he is the man you are marrying, you seem very disappointed that I am not him." "No," she sobbed. Charles was my fiancé. Richard destroyed him. We destroyed him." "That sounds like a tragic story," I said, releasing her. "But I am a businessman, not a priest. I suggest you go back to your table before your husband gets jealous." "I am not crazy," she cried, backing away as I stepped toward her. "I know it is you, the way you hold your shoulders, the way you looked at that painting." "Why are you doing this?" I leaned in, close, invading her personal space until she was pressed against the marble vanity. "I am doing business, Elena," I whispered, letting a sliver of my natural American accent slip through just enough to terrify her before burying it back under the Italian. "Non capisco cosa vuoi da me." I do not understand what you want from me." I turned and walked out, leaving her sobbing in the men's room of a 3 Michelin-star restaurant. I returned to the table. Richard was on his phone, bragging to someone about the funding. "Elena is not feeling well," I told him. I believe the excitement was too much for her. I paid the bill, another power move, and left. As soon as I was in the back of the Rolls-Royce, the facade dropped. I slumped against the leather seat, exhaling a breath I felt I'd been holding for 2 hours. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer intoxicating rush of it. I had looked them in the eye. I had fed them the poison, and they had thanked me for the meal. I pulled out the burner phone Blackwood had given me. I dialed a number. Sarah answered on the first ring. "Did he sign?" "He signed," I said, watching the city lights blur past the window. "We own him." "And the timeline?" she asked. "Strict liability," I said. "One day late and he loses it all." Sarah laughed a dark, satisfied sound. "He will never make it." "Make sure of it," I commanded. "Initiate phase 2. I want the steel shipments delayed. I want the glass panels routed to the wrong state. I want the cement mixers to break down. Bleed him, Sarah. Make every single day a nightmare." "Consider it done," she said. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the skyline. The Millennium Tower was out there, a dark skeleton, waiting to be clad in glass. It was my design, my dream. And soon it would be my weapon. Richard Vance wanted to play God. He wanted to build a tower to the heavens. I was just going to make sure he had a long, long way to fall. Chaos is not a natural phenomenon. In the world of high-stakes construction, chaos is a manufactured product, and I had become its chief engineer. For the last 10 days, I had been orchestrating a symphony of failures that was slowly driving Richard Vance out of his mind. It started with the steel. When the shipment of girders arrived for the 45th floor, the symbolic heart of the tower, they were not the gleaming silver beams Richard expected. They were pitted with oxidation covered in a bloom of orange rust that suggested they had been sitting in a saltwater bath for a decade. I sat in my penthouse watching the live feed from the construction site on my tablet. Sarah had done her job perfectly. A few well-placed bribes to a logistics manager in New Jersey had rerouted the high-grade steel to a scrapyard and replaced it with a batch of condemned metal from a demolished bridge. "Get it off my site," Richard was screaming on the video feed. I could see the spit flying from his mouth as he berated the foreman. "We cannot send it back, Mr. Vance," the foreman yelled back, gesturing to the crane. "The schedule is too tight. If we wait for a new shipment, we lose 3 weeks. "Paint it!" Richard roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Just paint over it. Use the industrial primer. No one will see the rust once the cladding is on." I watched as the foreman hesitated. He knew it was illegal. He knew that rust compromised the structural integrity, creating weak points that would snap under high wind torque. But he also knew Richard held his paycheck. He nodded slowly. "Paint it," the foreman said, defeated. I tapped the screen, saving the clip to a secure cloud server. Strike 1. 2 days later, the concrete mixers arrived. Sarah had arranged for a specialized additive to be slipped into the mix. Nothing toxic, just a high concentration of sugar. It is an old saboteur's trick. Sugar destroys the chemical bond in cement, preventing it from setting properly. It turns what should be rock-hard foundations into a crumbly, unstable mess. When the forms were removed 48 hours later, the concrete sloughed off like wet sand. Richard didn't scream this time. He just stood there staring at the ruined pillar, his hands shaking. He was doing the math. The deadline for the grand opening, and the default clause on my loan, was less than 10 days away. He was bleeding money, and now he was bleeding time. He did exactly what I knew he would do. He stopped fixing the problems and started hiding them. I had eyes everywhere. While Richard was distracted by the labor strike I had incited, the union representatives were surprisingly open to anonymous tips about unpaid overtime. I had a team of specialists infiltrate his office. They installed pinhole cameras in the smoke detector, the bookshelf, and even the eyes of the decorative lion statue on his desk. I became the ghost in his machine. I watched him make the calls that would seal his fate, cancel the stress tests I heard him tell his project manager late one Tuesday night. We do not have time. Just photocopy the results from the lower floors and change the dates. But Mr. Vance, the wind shear on the upper levels is different, the manager tried to argue. Do it, Richard slammed the phone down. I sat in the dark sipping espresso, cataloging every crime, every forged safety report, every bribe paid to look the other way. He was building a death trap and he was documenting it for me. But the pressure was not just on the building. It was on the home front. Elena was cracking. Sarah had acquired a burner phone and started a psychological campaign that was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Every few hours, Elena would receive a text message. I know you lied about the blueprints. Perjury carries a 5-year sentence. Does Richard love you enough to go to prison for you? I watched the fallout through the camera I had placed in their shared apartment living room. Elena was pacing, clutching her phone, her knuckles white. She looked like a trapped animal. The confident, cruel woman who had testified against me was gone. In her place was a paranoid wreck. She began to suspect the obvious. If someone knew about the lies, maybe Richard was setting her up. Maybe he was planning to take the money from the DeLuca loan and disappear, leaving her to face the FBI alone. It was a Wednesday evening when she finally snapped. Richard was still at the site, frantically trying to manage the disaster. Elena waited until the housekeeper left, then she went into Richard's home office. She moved the painting of the hunt scene on the wall to reveal a wall safe. I watched fascinated. I did not know she had the combination. She spun the dial. Her birthday, how predictable. And the heavy steel door clicked open. She did not find cash. She found passports, 2 of them. One for Richard Vance, one for a man named Arthur Pendleton, but with Richard's photo. There was no passport for her. I zoomed in on the feed. The look on her face was pure devastation. He was planning an exit strategy and she was not part of it. She began frantically pulling out papers, ledgers, anything she could find, throwing them onto the floor, searching for evidence of where the money was. She was making a mess fueled by panic and rage. Then the front door opened. Richard walked in. He was covered in dust from the site. His tie loosened, his eyes wild with exhaustion. He heard the noise in the office and ran down the hall. He stopped in the doorway. He saw the open safe. He saw the fake passport in Elena's hand. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Elena stood up, holding the passport like a weapon. "You are leaving? You are going to run away and leave me with this mess? Give me that," Richard said, stepping forward. "No!" she screamed. "Who is Arthur Pendleton? Where is my passport, Richard? Where is my money?" "You are hysterical," he sneered. "That is a contingency, just in case the DeLuca deal goes south." "In case?" She laughed, a shrill, broken sound. "You took $200 million from a shark, Richard. You are not building a tower. You are digging a grave. And you are going to throw me in it to save yourself." "Shut up." Richard lunged for her. She tried to dodge, but he was faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it, until she dropped the passport. "You used me," she yelled, clawing at his face. "You made me lie in court. You destroyed Charles. And now you are going to destroy me." Richard's hand moved in a blur. The sound of the slap was loud, a sharp crack that echoed through the expensive speakers of my surveillance system. Elena was knocked back against the desk. She touched her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Richard stood over her, breathing hard, his hand raised for a second strike. I watched from my penthouse. My finger hovered over the phone. I could call the police. I could send security. But I did not. I watched as Elena scrambled away from him, sobbing, locking herself in the bathroom. I watched Richard pour himself a drink, his hand shaking so badly the scotch splashed onto the floor. "Let them eat each other," I whispered to the empty room. This was the bed they made. Now they had to bleed in it. The violence did not stay contained in the apartment. The next day, the toxicity spilled onto the construction site. To make up for lost time, Richard ordered the crews to work double shifts, 20 hours a day. He disabled the safety interlocks on the high-speed material hoists to make them move faster. It was inevitable. Physics does not negotiate. At 3 in the afternoon, a hoist cable snapped. The emergency brakes, which had not been inspected in 6 months, failed to engage. The cage plummeted 4 stories before jamming against a twisted girder. Inside was a young electrician named Marcus. He survived, but his legs were crushed. I saw the aftermath on the news before Sarah even called me. Richard gave a statement to the press, his face a mask of fake concern. It was a tragic operator error, Richard told the cameras. We have the highest safety standards. This was an isolated incident caused by negligence on the part of the worker. He was blaming the victim. He was going to bury this kid under lawyers and NDAs to protect his grand opening. This time, I intervened. I did not go myself. I sent an associate from a separate law firm, unconnected to Sterling or DeLuca. We paid for Marcus's surgery, the best orthopedic surgeons in the city. Then we hired the most aggressive injury attorney in New York to represent him. The attorney met with Marcus in the hospital room. He told the boy not to sign the settlement Richard was offering, a paltry $50,000. He told him to sue for $50 million. When Richard received the lawsuit notification, he nearly had a stroke in his office. I watched him tear the paper into shreds. "Where is this coming from?" he screamed at his empty room. Who is funding this? He had no idea. He was fighting shadows. But the clock was the ultimate enemy. The opening gala was set for Saturday. The DeLuca contract stipulated that the building had to be fully certified for occupancy by Friday midnight. There was one hurdle left: the fire marshal inspection. The sprinkler system on the upper floors was non-functional. The pipes were dry. The pumps were not even connected to the main water line. There was no way to pass the inspection. On Friday morning, Richard met with the chief fire inspector in a diner in Queens. It was a clandestine meeting far from the prying eyes of the city. I did not have cameras in the diner, but I had a long-range directional microphone aimed at their booth from a van parked across the street. "I cannot sign off on this, Vance," the inspector said. His voice was heavy with reluctance. "There is no water pressure on floor 60. If a fire starts during your party, it will be a chimney. People will burn." Richard slid a thick envelope across the table. "There is $50,000 in there," Richard said, "and another $100,000 when the certificate is signed." The inspector hesitated. "It is not just the money, Vance. It is suicide. It is one night." Richard pressed his voice desperate. "Just one night. The pumps are arriving on Monday. I just need the paper for the weekend. Nothing is going to happen in 4 hours. It is a cocktail party, for God's sake." The inspector looked at the envelope. Greed is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the conscience. He took the envelope. "I will have the certificate on your desk by noon," the inspector said. I pulled off my headphones. The recording was crystal clear. Bribery. Reckless endangerment, conspiracy. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Richard Vance had just handed me the keys to his destruction. He thought he had bought himself a future. In reality, he had just signed a confession. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. The Millennium Tower stood tall against the twilight, its glass skin reflecting the dying sun. It looked majestic. It looked strong. But I knew the truth. It was a hollow shell, held together by lies, rust, and sugar. And tomorrow night I was going to walk into that tower and bring it all crashing down. "Prepare the car," Sarah, I said into my phone, "and tell Blackwood to have the legal team on standby. We are going to a party." The trap was primed. The bait was taken. The prey was fat and unsuspecting. Tomorrow the hunter would finally step out of the blind. The invitation arrived in a box wrapped in crushed velvet. Inside Resting on a pillow of black satin was a slab of heavy slate, engraved with gold leaf. It invited Carlos De Luca to the grand opening of the Millennium Tower and the engagement celebration of Richard Vance and Elena Rossi. It weighed nearly 3 pounds. It was pretentious, excessive, and utterly desperate. It was the architectural equivalent of a tombstone, though Richard did not know that yet. I held the invitation in my hand, feeling the cold weight of the slate. Richard was spending money he did not have to impress people he did not like. He was throwing a party on the deck of the Titanic, and he had just sent a VIP ticket to the iceberg. I picked up the phone. It was time to tighten the screws. Richard I said when he answered on the first ring, "The invitation is lovely, but before I step foot in that building, I need peace of mind." "What do you mean, Carlos?" Richard asked. His voice was high-tight with the stress of a man juggling chainsaws. "There are rumors," I said, examining my fingernails. "Rumors in the market about cut corners, about stability issues. My investors are nervous. I need a public show of faith. I want an independent safety inspection conducted tomorrow morning, broadcast live to the media." There was a silence on the other end, a long, terrified silence. I could practically hear his heart stopping. "Tomorrow?" Richard squeaked. "That is impossible. The schedule is—" "If the building is safe—" "Richard, there is nothing to fear," I interrupted. "Unless, of course, there is something you are hiding." "If so, the De Luca Fund withdraws its offer immediately." "No," he shouted. "No, do not withdraw. We will do it tomorrow morning." I hung up and smiled. Richard thought he could solve this the way he solved everything, with a checkbook. He would try to bribe the inspection team. What he did not know was that the independent firm he was about to hire was a shell company owned by Sterling Dynamics. The inspectors were not inspectors. They were actors. And the script they were following was mine. The next morning was a farce of Shakespearean proportions. I watched from my limousine parked a block away as Richard met the inspection team. He looked like a man marching to the gallows. He led the chief inspector, a stern man named Kowalski, who was actually a retired structural engineer on my payroll, into a private construction trailer. I turned up the volume on the surveillance feed. "I know how these things work," Richard was saying, his hands shaking as he pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. "We are all professionals. Sometimes the paperwork needs to be streamlined." He slid the envelope across the desk. It contained $50,000 in cash. Kowalski looked at the envelope. He looked at Richard. Then, with the stoic face of a man who deserved an Academy Award, he slid the envelope into his pocket. "We will make sure the report reflects the excellence of your work," Mr. Vance Kowalski said. Richard exhaled, his shoulders slumping in relief. He thought he had bought safety. He thought he had bought silence. In reality, he had just paid for his own autopsy. With Richard busy managing the fake inspection, it was time to isolate the Queen. I sent a message to Elena, a simple text to her private number. "I know about the recording from the restaurant. Meet me at the VIP Sky Lounge, alone." Or Richard gets the audio. It was a bluff. I did not have a recording of her panic in the restroom, but a guilty conscience is a powerful architect of fear. She would come. The Sky Lounge was on the 55th floor, an unfinished space of exposed steel and glass that offered a vertigo-inducing view of Manhattan. The wind whistled through the gaps in the cladding, a mournful, hollow sound. I stood by the edge looking down at the ants crawling on the pavement below. I heard the click of heels on the concrete floor. Elena stood in the doorway. She was wearing a trench coat, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked small against the vast backdrop of the gray sky. "Where is the recording?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned slowly. I was not wearing my sunglasses. I was not slouching. I let the persona of Carlos De Luca dissolve like smoke. I stood tall, my shoulders squared, my gaze direct. "Hello, Elena," I said. My voice was my own. American, familiar. The voice she used to wake up to. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She staggered back, hitting the doorframe. "Charles," she whispered. "It is really you." She stared at me as if I were a corpse that had clawed its way out of the earth. In a way, I was. "You died," she sobbed. "Everyone said you died in prison. Or on the streets." "I did die," I said, walking slowly toward her. "The man who loved you died. The man who trusted you died. What is left is just the bill collector. And I have come to collect." She collapsed to her knees, weeping. It was a pathetic display. "Oh, Charles, you have to believe me. I did not want to do it." "He forced me," Richard made me testify. "He said he would kill you if I did not help him frame you. I did it to save you. Liar." I stopped 2 feet away from her. I looked down at her with nothing but cold curiosity. "You did not do it to save me, Elena. You did it because Richard promised you a penthouse. You did it because you liked the idea of being the wife of a billionaire, more than the wife of an architect. Do not insult my intelligence with this melodrama." She looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. The mask of the victim slipped, revealing the calculator underneath. "What do you want?" she asked, wiping her face. "I want the ledger," I said. "I know Richard keeps a double set of books. I know he has been skimming from the investors and paying bribes for years. You are the only one he trusts enough to know where the digital key is." "If I give it to you, will you let me go?" she asked. "Will you destroy him and leave me out of it?" I crouched down so our faces were level. "Give me the drive, Elena, and I will give you a head start." She hesitated. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a silver USB drive. It was small, unassuming, the kind of thing you could lose in a couch cushion. But inside that drive was the evidence of a decade of fraud. She placed it in my hand. "There," she said. "It is all there. The offshore accounts, the bribes to the city officials, the fake invoices for the steal. Now promise me I am safe." I closed my fingers around the drive. I looked at her. I saw her left hand clutching her purse tightly against her chest. I saw the faint rhythmic pulse of a tiny red light through the fabric of the bag. She was recording me. She was planning to use this conversation. If Richard won, she would play it for him to prove she was loyal, that she had tried to trap me. If I won, she would use it to prove she had cooperated. She was playing both sides of the board. A smirk touched the corner of my lips. She was a survivor. I could almost admire it if I did not despise her so much. I took the drive and stood up. "You have your head start, Elena," I said. "But I suggest you run fast. Because when this building falls, the shockwave is going to take out everything in its radius, including you." She scrambled to her feet and ran. She did not look back. She thought she had won. She thought she had insurance. She did not realize that the insurance policy was void the moment she betrayed me the first time. I watched her disappear into the elevator. Then, I pulled out my phone. "Upload the files," I said to Sarah. "And release the press statement." "Now?" Sarah asked. "The party starts in 3 hours. Now," I said. "Let's crash the market before they even serve the appetizers." I walked out of the tower and back to my car. The city was beginning to light up, oblivious to the bomb I had just detonated in the financial sector. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, a press release was sent to every major news outlet, financial blog, and stock exchange terminal in the world. The headline was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. Sterling Dynamics announces hostile takeover of Vance and Partners debt. Mystery chairman reveals massive fraud in Millennium Tower project. The article did not just speculate. It provided proof. It attached the preliminary safety reports I had gathered. It hinted at the identity of the new chairman of Sterling Dynamics, a man who had risen from the ashes of a wrongful conviction. It did not name me yet. I saved that for the room, but it named Richard. I sat in my office and watched the stock ticker on the screen. Vance and Partners stock began to plummet. It was a red line falling off a cliff. Down 10%, down 20%. Trading was halted, then resumed, then halted again. The phone lines at Vance and Partners would be melting. The investors would be screaming. But Richard would not know. Not yet. He was currently standing in the ballroom of the Millennium Tower, surrounded by flowers and ice sculptures waiting for his guests. He had likely confiscated the phones of his staff to ensure privacy for the event, a standard narcissistic move. He was in a bubble of ignorance. He was adjusting his tie, checking his reflection, thinking he was the king of New York. He did not know that outside his glass walls, his kingdom was burning to the ground. I put on my tuxedo. It was black sharp and fit like a second skin. I adjusted the cuffs. The invitation said the dress code was black tie. I looked in the mirror. No, I whispered. The dress code is funeral attire. I walked out of the door. The sweet trap was sprung. The honey was poisoned. And the fly was already stuck waiting for the spider to come and finish the meal. The elevator ascent to the 60th floor was a silent vertical journey into the heart of the beast. I stood alone in the private car, watching the digital floor numbers climb. With every passing floor, I shed a layer of the past 2 years. The prison jumpsuit, the rags of the homeless shelter, the Italian suits of Carlos De Luca. Tonight, I was wearing a simple black tuxedo cut sharp and severe. My face was clean-shaven, the beard gone, revealing the jawline that Richard Vance had tried to shatter. I was not a ghost anymore. I was a reckoning. The doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a funeral bell. The noise hit me first, a wall of chatter clinking crystal and a string quartet playing Vivaldi. The scent was a nauseating blend of caviar expensive perfume and the ozone smell of unfinished construction. The 60th floor was a glass cage suspended in the sky. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city I now owned. But inside, the air was stale. The ventilation system, as I knew it would be, was barely functioning. I stepped out. The room was packed with the elite of New York. Senators, hedge fund managers, socialites. The same people who had turned their backs on me when I fell. They were drinking Richard's champagne, laughing at his jokes, oblivious to the fact that the floor beneath their feet was held together by fraud and sugar-tainted concrete. Richard was standing on a raised platform at the far end of the room, a microphone in his hand. He looked manic. His face was flushed, his eyes darting around the room with a frantic energy. He was sweating through his silk shirt. Elena stood beside him, a statue of ice, clutching her purse, as if it contained a grenade. "I would like to propose a toast," Richard shouted, his voice amplified by the speakers. "To vision, to the future, to the Millennium Tower, a beacon." I stepped into the light. I did not shout. I did not make a scene. I simply walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting around me, like water around a stone. The sheer force of my presence, the silence of my movement drew eyes. One by one, the guests stopped talking. The quartet faltered and stopped playing. Richard looked down. He saw a man in a tuxedo walking toward him. At first, he squinted, confused. He was looking for Carlos De Luca, the bearded European. He did not recognize the clean-shaven man with the cold, dead eyes. Then he saw the scar on my left eyebrow, a souvenir from a drafting table accident 10 years ago. The glass of champagne slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the stage, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silent room. "Charles," he whispered into the microphone. The feedback whined a piercing shriek that made the guests wince. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Charles Garcia? The felon? I thought he was dead." I stopped at the base of the platform. I looked up at him. "Hello, Richard," I said. My voice was calm, steady, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "You are standing in my spot." Richard stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Security!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get him out of here! This man is trespassing!" 2 burly guards started to move toward me. I held up a hand. They stopped. "I am not trespassing," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. "I am the landlord." I pulled out a folded document. It was the contract Richard had signed with the DeLuca Fund. According to paragraph 4, subsection B of our loan agreement, I said, holding the paper up to the light ownership of the Millennium Tower, and all assets of Vance and Partners reverts to the lender if the building is not fully open and operational by 6 o'clock this evening. I checked my watch. It was a cheap plastic watch I had bought at a drugstore, a deliberate insult to his Patek Philippe. "It is now 9 o'clock, Richard. You are 3 hours late." Richard laughed a hysterical, breathless sound. "You are crazy. We open the doors at 5. "The guests are here. The party's happening." "Yes," I said, smiling thinly. "The guests are here. But the main service elevators? The ones required by code for full occupancy? They have been stuck between the lobby and the mezzanine since 4 this afternoon." I pointed to the elevator bank. The lights were dark. "A technical malfunction," I continued. "Or perhaps just bad wiring. Either way, according to the city statutes and the terms of your contract, a building cannot be considered open if its primary vertical transport is offline. You defaulted, Richard. 3 hours ago." The color drained from his face. He looked at the elevators, then back at me. He knew the wiring was cheap. He knew he had cut corners. He just did not know that I had paid a technician $5,000 to trip the circuit breaker at exactly 3:59. "This is insane," Richard sputtered. "You are Charles Garcia. You are a convict. You do not have the money to lend me $2, let alone $200 million. I did not answer. I stepped aside. The elevator doors behind me opened. The service elevator I had used. James Blackwood stepped out, flanked by 4 uniformed officers and a team of lawyers carrying briefcases. Mr. Vance Blackwood announced, his voice booming. "I am James Blackwood, representing Sterling Dynamics. We have executed a hostile acquisition of the DeLuca Fund's assets. As of this moment, this building and your company are the property of Mr. Charles Garcia, the new chairman of Sterling." The room erupted. The flashbulbs of the press, who had been invited to cover a triumph, were now capturing a massacre. Richard looked at Blackwood. He looked at the police. He looked at the contract. The walls were closing in. The reality of his failure was a physical weight crushing his lungs. He turned to Elena. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "She did it!" he shrieked, shoving her forward. "She is the one! She embezzled the funds. She sabotaged the elevators. I had no idea. She has been stealing from the company for years." Elena stumbled, almost falling off the stage. She looked at Richard with horror. This was the man she had destroyed me for. This was the love of her life. A coward who would use her as a human shield the moment the wind changed. I looked at her. I saw the realization break her heart. Charles walked up the steps onto the stage. I stood next to the trembling couple. "Really, Richard?" I asked softly. "You are going to blame the woman who perjured herself to save you? That is low, even for you." I turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "Mr. Vance claims he is innocent. He claims he is a victim of sabotage. But I believe transparency is the foundation of trust. So let us look at the foundation of this building." I pulled a small remote from my pocket. I pointed it at the massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Richard's achievements. The screen flickered. The image changed. It was the video from the construction site. The video of Richard, red-faced and angry, pointing at the rusted steel beams. "Paint it!" the Richard on the screen roared. "Just paint over it. No one will see the rust once the cladding is on." The crowd gasped. I saw a senator drop his drink. I saw the structural engineer, who had been bribed, try to sneak toward the exit. I clicked the remote again. The audio file played. It was the recording from the diner, crystal clear. "There is $50,000 in there. And another 100,000 when the certificate is signed. I clicked it, one last time. The screen went black, but the audio continued. It was Richard's voice, screaming in his apartment. "You stupid puppet! You did what I told you to do. You are nothing without me." Silence. Absolute terrifying silence. Richard stood frozen. He was stripped naked in front of the people he desperately wanted to impress. His genius was exposed as fraud. His love was exposed as abuse. His legacy was exposed as a crime scene. He looked at the crowd. He saw disgust. He saw judgment. He looked at me. He saw the abyss. "You," he hissed. "You ruined everything." He reached into his jacket. "Gun!" someone screamed. The crowd panicked. People dove under tables. Waiters dropped trays of glasses. The chaos was instantaneous. Richard pulled out a silver pistol. It was a small, sleek weapon, the kind a man carries not to fight, but to feel powerful. He pointed it at my chest. His hand was shaking so violently that the barrel waved in circles. "Stay back!" he screamed. "I will kill you." "I swear to God, Charles, I will kill you." The police officers drew their weapons, aiming at him. "Drop the gun!" the sergeant shouted. Richard ignored them. His eyes were locked on mine. He was crying now, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down his face. "You took my company," he sobbed. "You took my life." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the gun. Then I looked at his eyes. "I took back what was mine, Richard," I said calmly. I took a step toward him. "Stop!" he shrieked, cocking the hammer. "Do not come closer!" I took another step. I was 5 feet away. I could see the rifling inside the barrel. "You are not going to shoot me, Richard," I said. My voice was low, intimate, just for him. "You do not know me," he yelled. "I know you better than you know yourself," I said. "You are a narcissist, Richard. You love yourself more than anything in this world. If you shoot me, you go to prison for life. You die in a cage. But if you drop the gun, maybe you can talk your way out of it. Maybe you can cut a deal. That is what you do, right? You make deals." I took another step. The gun was inches from my chest. "Shoot me and you lose the only thing you have left," I whispered. "Your future." Richard hesitated. His eyes darted to the police, to the crowd, to the exit. He was doing the math. He was calculating the odds. He was a coward. And cowards do not go down in a blaze of glory. They survive. His shoulders slumped. The gun lowered an inch. "That is it," I said softly. "Be smart, Richard." Suddenly, the glass windows behind us exploded inward. "Use the distraction, Richard." A voice in his head must have screamed. But it was not a distraction. It was the SWAT team rappelling from the roof, shattering the glass, to breach the perimeter. Richard spun around, startled by the noise. I moved. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it up and away. The gun fired into the ceiling, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster rained down on the stage. I swept his legs. Richard Vance, the billionaire architect, hit the floor with a pathetic thud. I put my knee on his chest and wrenched the gun from his hand. He flailed, scratching at my suit, screaming like a child. "It is over, Richard," I said, tossing the gun to the side. The police swarmed the stage. They hauled him up, cuffing his hands behind his back. He was still screaming, shouting threats, shouting about his lawyers, shouting that he was a victim. Elena sat on the floor, staring at nothing. She did not move. She did not speak. She just watched as they dragged the man she had sold her soul for out of the room. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I looked out at the ruins of the party. The guests were huddled in corners, terrified. The floor was covered in broken glass and spilled champagne. I walked over to the microphone. It was still on. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice echoed through the shattered room. "The party is over. Please exit via the stairwell in an orderly fashion. And do not worry about the bill." I paused, looking at the screen, where Richard's face was still frozen in a rictus of anger. Sterling Dynamics is picking up the tab. I walked off the stage. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, hollow ache in my bones. I had won. I had destroyed him. But as I looked at the empty champagne flutes and the terrified faces of the elite, I realized that victory did not taste like vengeance. It tasted like ash. You think the handcuffs mean it is over. You think seeing the bad guy dragged away by the boys in blue is the end of the movie. But in the real world, rats are most dangerous when they are cornered, and Richard Vance was a rat the size of a man. As the officers hauled Richard toward the service exit, the building gave a groan. It was a low subsonic rumble that vibrated through the soles of my shoes deeper than the bass of the string quartet. The cheap steel in the sub-basement, heated by the friction of the overworked generators, and now stressing under the weight of the overcrowded ballroom, shifted. The floor tilted. Just a fraction of an inch, but enough. The two officers holding Richard stumbled. The sudden shift threw them off balance on the slick, champagne-soaked floor. Richard, fueled by the adrenaline of a man facing life in a cage, seized the split second of chaos. He did not run. He threw his body weight against the security console mounted on the wall next to the service elevator, the same console that controlled the building's automated emergency systems. He headbutted the panel, glass shattered. He screamed a command, his voice ragged and primal. "Lockdown! Protocol 0! Override!" The building's AIA system I had designed to protect the occupants in case of a terrorist attack obeyed its master. But Richard had rewired the protocols. He had turned the shield into a cage. Massive steel blast shutters slammed down over the windows, cutting off the view of the night sky and the police snipers. The heavy oak doors to the stairwells locked with the thunderous clank of magnetic bolts engaging. The service elevator dead-bolted. In 3 seconds, the ballroom on the 60th floor transformed from a party venue into a sealed vault. The crowd screamed. It was a singular, terrifying sound. The sound of 300 wealthy, entitled people realizing their money could not buy them a way out. Richard scrambled away from the dazed officers, grabbing a jagged shard of the broken champagne bottle from the floor. He backed up toward the main podium, his chest heaving, blood trickling from his forehead where he had smashed the console. "Nobody moves!" he shrieked, waving the glass shank. "The system is voice-locked to me. You touch me and we all die in here." He pulled a device from his pocket. It looked like a garage door opener, but I knew what it was. It was the remote control for the gas main valves in the basement, a feature installed to remotely shut off gas in case of a leak. But Richard had reversed the polarity. "I have just opened the main valves in the sub-basement," Richard announced, his eyes wide and manic. "The gas is flooding the mechanical levels as we speak. I have rigged the igniters on the boiler to spark in exactly 20 minutes. He looked at the SWAT commander, who was raising his rifle. "Put it down!" Richard yelled. "You shoot me, I drop this remote." "It has a deadman switch. If my thumb leaves this button, the spark triggers instantly. Boom! The whole tower goes up like a Roman candle." The commander hesitated. He signaled his men to lower their weapons. "What do you want, Vance?" the commander barked. "I want a helicopter," Richard screamed. "I want a chopper on the roof in 15 minutes. I want a flight path cleared to Teterboro. And I want him." He pointed the glass shard at me. "I want Charles Garcia to come with me, as insurance." The room was suffocating. The air conditioning had cut off with the lockdown, and the smell of fear, acrid and sharp, was filling the space. The floor groaned again, louder this time. The building was settling, and not in a good way. The rusted beams I had seen in the video were buckling. I stepped forward. The guests parted for me, their eyes pleading. They looked at me not as the villain who had ruined the party, but as the only man who knew how to stop the monster he had created. I looked at the walls. I looked at the ceiling. I knew this building. I knew it better than I knew the lines on my own palm. I had drawn every bolt, every duct, every secret hollow. When I designed the Millennium Tower, I had included a panic room on the executive level, A reinforced chamber, meant for dignitaries hidden behind a false wall in the library section of the ballroom. Richard did not know it existed. He had never looked at the architectural detailing. He only looked at the renderings and the profit margins. I caught the eye of the SWAT commander. I tapped my ear, a subtle signal. "Listen to me." "Richard," I said, keeping my voice calm, walking slowly toward the center of the room. "You are not going to get a helicopter. The roof vents are blocked. The updraft from the gas leak will crash any pilot crazy enough to try." "Shut up," Richard spat. "You built this place. You find a way." "I am trying to help you," I lied. I moved slightly to the left, drawing his attention away from the crowd huddled near the library alcove. "If you want to get out, you need to release the lockdown manually. The console is broken. You have to go to the breaker box in the kitchen," Richard sneered. "You think I am stupid? You want to trap me in the kitchen?" The floor lurched violently. A chandelier crashed to the ground, sending crystal shrapnel flying. Screams erupted again. The structure was failing faster than I thought. The vibration from the gas pressure in the lower levels was shaking the foundations. I turned to the crowd, pitching my voice low and urgent, masking it under the noise of the panic. The library, I whispered to the nearest group. The mahogany panel with the brass sconce. Push the third brick from the floor. It is a panic room. Go. Now. Word spread like a ripple. While Richard was focused on me, the guests began to shuffle backward toward the library. Richard saw the movement. "Hey, where do you think you are going?" he yelled, turning his head. "Now!" I launched myself. I crossed the 20 feet between us in a heartbeat. Richard swung the glass shard wildly. It sliced through the sleeve of my tuxedo, carving a shallow trench into my forearm. I did not feel it. I tackled him around the waist, driving him backward into the podium. We hit the floor hard. The remote skittered across the tiles, sliding toward the edge of the stage. "Get the remote!" I shouted to the commander. The SWAT team surged forward, but the floor tilted again, steep and sudden like the deck of a sinking ship. The officers slipped, sliding away from the stage. Richard kicked me in the chest. He was strong, fueled by the hysterical strength of the insane. He scrambled on top of me, his hands closing around my throat. "You ruin everything!" he screamed, spittle flying into my face. "You were supposed to be dead!" "Why wouldn't you just stay dead?" I gagged, struggling to pry his thumbs from my windpipe. My vision started to swim. I saw the guests disappearing into the wall panel of the library. They were safe. The panic room was reinforced with titanium. It would survive the collapse. But I was not in the panic room. Suddenly, a flash of emerald green appeared in my peripheral vision. Elena. She had not run to the panic room. She had grabbed a heavy, silver ice bucket from a fallen table. With a scream that was half sob, half war cry, she swung it at Richard's head. "Let him go!" The bucket connected with a sickening thud against Richard's shoulder. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was enough. Richard roared in pain and released my throat. He spun around, backhanding Elena with a force that sent her flying. "Stupid bitch!" he yelled. Elena crashed into a pile of debris. Her leg twisted at an unnatural angle under a fallen beam. A sharp, dry crack echoed through the room. She screamed, clutching her shin, her face turning gray with shock. "My leg!" she wailed. "Oh God, my leg!" Richard stood up, panting. He looked at the remote, which had stopped sliding near the edge of the drop-off, where the glass wall used to be. He looked at Elena, writhing in pain. He looked at me, getting to my feet. He lunged for the remote. I could have let him go. I could have run for the panic room myself. But Elena was lying there, helpless, directly in the path of the falling ceiling tiles. The Charles Garcia who wanted revenge would have left her. She was a traitor. She was a liar. She deserved this. But the Charles Garcia who gave his coat to a dying man in a snowstorm could not do it. I dove. Not for Richard, not for the remote. I dove for Elena. I grabbed her by the waist and rolled us both under the heavy oak conference table, just as a massive section of the decorative plaster ceiling gave way. It crashed down right where she had been lying bearing the floor in dust and rubble. Richard reached the remote. He grabbed it, his thumb hovering over the button. He stood up laughing, his silhouette framed against the blast shutters. "I win!" he screamed. "If I go down, we all go down." He pressed the button. Click. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Click, click, click. He stared at the device in horror. I stood up from under the table, coughing in the dust. The signal jammer, I rasped, pointing to the SWAT commander, who was holding a small black box. "Standard tactical procedure, Richard. They jammed all radio frequencies the moment they breached. Your dead man switch is dead." Richard looked at the device, then at me. His face crumpled. The monster dissolved, leaving only a pathetic, frightened child. The floor beneath him gave a terrible metallic screech. The structural bolts on the cantilevered observation deck, the ones he had bought from the lowest bidder, snapped. The section of the floor Richard was standing on simply dropped away. He screamed, flailing for purchase, but there was nothing to grab. He slid down the tilting slab, sliding toward the open gap where the glass had been blown out by the SWAT team. "Help me!" he shrieked, his fingernails clawing useless grooves into the floor. "Charles, help me!" I took a step forward. Instinct, muscle memory, saved the falling man. But the gap was too wide, and the floor I was standing on was crumbling. Richard slid over the edge. His scream was long fading into the howl of the wind outside until it was swallowed by the city below. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the groaning of the dying building. The commander grabbed my arm. "We have to go, now. The gas fire is weakening the main supports." "The whole top section is going to shear off." I looked at Elena. She was under the table, barely conscious, clutching her broken leg. "I cannot leave her," I said. The commander looked at the structural damage. "We cannot carry her down 60 flights. We have to rappel out the window." I crouched down and pulled Elena out. She whimpered, her eyes fluttering open. "Charles," she whispered. "You saved me." I did not answer. I hoisted her into my arms. She screamed in pain, but I held her tight. She was lighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was just stronger. I carried her to the shattered window where the SWAT cables were waiting. The wind was ferocious, whipping my hair into my eyes. "Clip her on," I shouted to the officer. He attached the harness to Elena. "You go first," the officer yelled at me. "No, send her." They pushed Elena out into the void. The cable caught her, and she swung away from the building, descending into the darkness, toward the safety of the lower roofs. I clipped on next. As I stepped onto the ledge, I looked back at the ballroom. It was a ruin. The symbols of Richard's greed, the ice sculptures, the velvet, the gold, were covered in dust and blood. The floor I had just been standing on collapsed into the level below with a deafening roar. I jumped. The cable snapped taut, jerking the air out of my lungs. I plummeted down the side of the glass coffin, the wind screaming in my ears. I watched as the lights of the 60th floor flickered and died. Smoke was pouring out of the lower levels now, black and thick. The tower was bleeding. I landed hard on the roof of the adjacent building, rolling to absorb the impact. The SWAT team was there, cutting Elena out of her harness. Medics were rushing in. I stood up, unclipping the carabiner. I walked over to the edge of the roof and looked up. The Millennium Tower stood against the night sky, a dark, smoking obelisk. It did not fall completely. My original core design was too good for that. But it was broken, twisted, ruined. It was over. I looked at my hands. They were covered in dust and Richard's blood. I took a deep breath of the cold city air. It tasted like gasoline and winter. But for the first time in 2 years, it also tasted like freedom. The fall should have killed him. In any just universe, Richard Vance would have plummeted 60 stories to the pavement, leaving nothing but a stain on the concrete and a cautionary tale on the evening news. But the devil, as they say, looks after his own. Richard did not hit the street. He hit the extended steel platform of the window, washing rig suspended 3 floors below the ballroom. The impact shattered his pelvis, crushed 3 vertebrae, and broke both his legs, but it did not extinguish his life. It merely incapacitated him long enough for the SWAT team to rappel down and scrape him off the metal grate like roadkill. Fate, it seemed, was not content with a quick death. Fate wanted a spectacle. 1 week later, the spectacle began. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a fortress of limestone and granite, a stark contrast to the glass fragility of the Millennium Tower. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled by journalists, creditors, and the former elite who had fled the party in terror. They were there to see the final act of the tragedy. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. I was not the accused, but I felt the weight of every eye on my back. I was the architect of this downfall. I was the man who had pulled the thread that unraveled the tapestry. Richard was wheeled in first. He was strapped into a medical chair, his body encased in plaster and fiberglass, his neck in a rigid brace. He looked small. The bombastic, arrogant titan of industry had withered into a broken doll. His eyes, usually sharp with malice, were dull and glazed, likely from the heavy painkillers pumping through his system. When he saw me, he did not scream. He did not threaten. He simply looked away, staring at the floor with the vacant expression of a man who knows he is already dead. Elena was brought in next. She was not in a wheelchair, though she walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a cane, her cast hidden beneath long, modest trousers. She wore a simple gray cardigan, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. It was a costume. She was playing the role of the battered wife, the coerced victim, the fragile flower crushed under the boot of a tyrant. The trial was swift. The evidence I had provided, the digital ledgers, the bribe recordings, the safety reports, the video of Richard ordering the painting of rusted steel, was not just compelling. It was overwhelming. The prosecution painted a portrait of a sociopath who viewed human life as a line item on a spreadsheet to be minimized. Richard's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender, because Richard's assets were frozen and his previous legal team had resigned en masse, made a half-hearted attempt to plead insanity. It did not stick. Richard was not crazy. He was evil. There is a difference. Then came Elena's turn. Her lawyer was better. He was paid for by her family, who had scraped together their savings to save her. He painted a sympathetic picture. He argued that Elena Rossi was a victim of coercive control. He spoke of Richard's temper, his physical abuse, citing the slap caught on camera, and his threats against her life. Elena took the stand. She wept. Her tears were measured perfect. I had no choice, she told the jury, her voice trembling. Richard told me he would kill Charles if I did not lie in the first trial. He told me he would kill me if I tried to leave. I was a prisoner in that penthouse. I only took the ledger to try and escape. I was trying to save myself. The jury was swaying. I could see it in their faces. They looked at Richard, the monster in the wheelchair, and then at Elena, the weeping woman. It was an easy narrative to believe. The prosecutor looked at me. I nodded. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, standing up. "We have one final piece of evidence to submit regarding Ms. Rossi's testimony. A recording taken 1 hour before the party in the VIP Sky Lounge." Elena froze. Her hand went to her throat. She looked at me, her eyes widening in genuine terror. She remembered the conversation. She remembered the blackmail. The prosecutor played the file. My voice filled the courtroom, calm and cold. "Give me the drive, Elena, and I will give you a head start." Then Elena's voice, not fearful, not coerced, but calculating. "If I give it to you, will you let me go? Will you destroy him and leave me out of it?" And then the final nail in her coffin. Promise me I am safe. I have the files, the offshore accounts, the bribes. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. This was not the voice of a terrified victim. This was the voice of a conspirator negotiating a plea deal. She had not stolen the ledger to expose Richard. She had stolen it to use as leverage. She was ready to sell him out not for justice, but for immunity. Elena slumped in the witness box, the mask of innocence shattered, revealing the opportunist beneath. She did not look at the jury. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the realization that I had known who she was all along. The deliberations took less than 4 hours. The judge, a stern woman with eyes like flint, read the sentencing. Richard Vance. For 1 count of first-degree fraud. For 1 count of involuntary manslaughter. Regarding the death of the construction worker Marcus, who had died of his injuries 2 days prior. For 300 counts of reckless endangerment. For the kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment of the gala guests. We sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Richard did not react. He just closed his eyes. He would spend the rest of his miserable life in a concrete box, unable to walk, unable to rule, unable to hurt anyone ever again. Then the judge turned to Elena Rossi, for perjury, for conspiracy to commit fraud, for obstruction of justice. The sentencing guidelines suggested 10 to 15 years. The judge looked ready to throw the book at her. "Your Honor," I said, standing up. The courtroom gasped. Victims rarely speak during sentencing unless it is an impact statement. "Mr. Garcia," the judge asked, peering over her glasses. "I would like to request leniency for Miss Rossi," I said. Elena's head snapped up. She looked at me, confusion warring with hope. "Why?" the judge asked. "She conspired to frame you. She sent you to prison for 2 years. She ruined your life. Because, Your Honor," I said, looking directly at Elena. "Hate is a heavy stone. I carried it for 2 years, and I am tired of the weight. Ms. Rossi is not a mastermind. She is a tragedy. She traded her integrity for a lifestyle that did not exist. Giving her 15 years gives her a martyr complex. Giving her 5 years gives her a chance to remember who she used to be before greed hollowed her out." I paused. "And frankly, Your Honor, I do not want to think about her for 15 years. I want to forget she exists." It was not forgiveness. It was a dismissal. It was the ultimate insult. I was saying she was not worth the energy of my hatred. The judge considered this. She looked at Elena, who was sobbing openly now. Not the fake tears of a performer, but the ugly, racking sobs of someone who realizes they have been pitied by the man they destroyed. "Very well," the judge said, taking into account the victim's request. "I sentence you to 5 years in a minimum security federal facility." Elena was led away. As she passed me, she stopped. The bailiff tried to nudge her forward, but she resisted. "Charles," she whispered. I did not look at her. I looked straight ahead at the symbol of Lady Justice on the wall. "Goodbye, Elena." She vanished through the side door. The chapter was closed. But there was one more structure to demolish. 2 days later, I stood on the podium in the press room of Sterling Dynamics. The cameras were flashing, but this time, I was not hiding in the shadows. As the new chairman of Sterling Dynamics, I said into the microphone, "My first act is regarding the Millennium Tower." The room went quiet. Everyone expected me to announce a retrofit, a repair plan, a way to salvage the billion-dollar investment. "I have reviewed the structural analysis," I continued. "The corruption in the bones of that building is too deep. The steel is compromised. The foundation is flawed. It cannot be fixed." I took a deep breath. "I am ordering the immediate and total demolition of the Millennium Tower." The reporters erupted. "Mr. Garcia," one shouted, "that is a $2 billion write-off. You will bankrupt the project. The shareholders will revolt. Let them revolt," I said calmly. "A building stands on 2 things, concrete and trust. If I open that tower, I am telling the world that money matters more than human life. I will not build my legacy on a graveyard. We will tear it down, and we will build something else, something real. I walked off the stage. The next morning, something unprecedented happened. I expected the stock to tank. I expected the board to call for my resignation. Instead, Sterling Dynamics stock soared. The market did not see a loss. They saw integrity. In a world of corporate greed and cover-ups, a CEO who was willing to burn $2 billion to ensure public safety was a unicorn. I became the face of the new ethical capitalism. The loss was a financial crater, but the reputation capital was priceless. That afternoon, I drove to the outskirts of the city. The snow had finally melted, replaced by the gray slush of early March. I entered the quiet gates of the Holy Cross Cemetery. I found the grave easily. It was a simple stone, polished black granite, just like the business card he had given me. Benjamin Sterling. He built empires but sought only truth. I stood there for a long time. The wind was cold, but it felt clean. I was not wearing an Italian suit. I was wearing jeans and a heavy wool sweater. I carried a bundle under my arm. I knelt down and unfolded it. It was the parka. My old, dirty duct-taped parka. The one I had wrapped around a dying old man in an alleyway. The coat that had started it all. I placed it gently on the grass over the grave. "I did it, Ben," I whispered. I stopped him. I tore it down. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The rage that had fueled me for so long was gone, leaving a space that felt vast and empty, but peaceful. I heard footsteps behind me in the crunching snow. I turned. It was James Blackwood. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were warm. "I thought I might find you here," he said. "Is it done?" I asked. "The demolition crews start on Monday," Blackwood said. "And the board is eating out of your hand. You are a hero, Charles." "I am not a hero," I said, looking at the grave. "I am just a man who paid his debts." Blackwood reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a cream-colored envelope, sealed with red wax. "Ben wanted you to have this," Blackwood said, handing it to me. "But only after the trial. Only after the circle was closed." I took the envelope. My name was written on the front in Ben's shaky, elegant script. I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Dear Charles, if you are reading this, you have succeeded. You have brought down the Tower of Lies. You probably think I chose you solely because of your kindness in that alley. You are half right. I chose you because you were kind. But I targeted Richard Vance for a different reason. Years ago, Richard was married to a woman named Catherine. She was brilliant, gentle, and an artist. He destroyed her, Charles. He gaslit her, stole her confidence, and eventually left her for a younger, more well-connected woman named Elena. Catherine died of an overdose 6 months later. She died of a broken heart. Catherine was my daughter. I was estranged from her at the time, my own foolish pride. But I watched her fall. I watched Richard Vance dismantle my little girl, just to climb a rung on the social ladder. I vowed then that I would not just kill him. I would wait until he built his masterpiece, and then I would make sure he watched it crumble. You were not just my heir, Charles. You were my instrument. You were the hand of a father's justice. Live well, my son. Build something that lasts. Ben, I lowered the letter. The wind rustled the trees, a soft, mournful sound. I looked at the headstone again. It wasn't just corporate rivalry. It wasn't just business. It was personal. Ben had been playing a game much longer and deeper than I had ever imagined. He had used me, yes, but he had used me to save us both. He had avenged his daughter, and he had saved my soul. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. "What does it say?" Blackwood asked softly. I looked at the lawyer. I looked at the sky where the clouds were breaking to reveal a sliver of pale blue. "It says that the debt is paid in full," I said. I turned away from the grave. "Let's go, James," I said. We have a lot of work to do. We have a new city to build. We walked back toward the car, leaving the old coat on the grave, a final offering to the ghost who had given me everything. The circle was closed. The past was buried. And for the first time in my life, the future was a blank blueprint, waiting for me to draw the first line. 2 years is a lifetime in the heartbeat of a city. It is enough time for concrete to cure, for wounds to scar over, and for a reputation to be rewritten. I stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, looking up at the structure that now occupied the space where Richard Vance's Tower of Lies once threatened the sky. It was not a gleaming needle of glass designed to pierce the clouds. It was something warmer, something that breathed. We called it the Benjamin. It was a 40-story mixed-use development, a cascading design of terracotta, reclaimed brick, and vertical gardens that seemed to spill over the balconies like a green waterfall. It housed a community center, a public library, and 300 units of high-quality subsidized housing for the working class of New York. It was beautiful. It won architectural awards not for its height, but for its humanity. Critics called it a masterpiece of empathetic design. I just called it a thank you note to a ghost. I walked through the main entrance. There were no security guards with tasers here. There was no velvet rope. The lobby was filled with natural light and the sound of children playing in the indoor park. "Good morning, Mr. Garcia," a voice boomed from the front desk. I turned to see a young man in a crisp uniform. His name was Leo. 2 years ago, Leo was the leader of the pack that had kicked me into the slush while I tried to protect old Ben. He had been a predator then, fueled by poverty and anger. When the police rounded up the local gangs shortly after the demolition, I had intervened. I went to the precinct. I did not press charges. Instead, I offered them a choice. They could go to Rikers Island for assault, or they could come to work for me. They had to pass a drug test, attend night school, and learn a trade. Leo chose the trade. Now he was the head of security for the Benjamin. He had gained 30 pounds of muscle, but the feral look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet pride. "Everything quiet this morning, Leo?" I asked. "Quiet as a church mouse, boss," he smiled. "Mrs. Higgins in 3B says her radiator is making a noise, but maintenance is already on it." "Good work," I said. I looked at him and saw the power of a second chance. Society would have thrown Leo away. It would have labeled him a thug and spent $50,000 a year to keep him in a cage. Instead, he was paying taxes, raising a daughter, and protecting the very people he used to victimize. That was the Sterling way now. We did not just build structures. We rebuilt lives. I took the elevator to the administrative offices on the second floor. My empire had changed. Sterling Dynamics was no longer just an energy giant. It was a laboratory for social capitalism. We proved that you could pay a living wage, use sustainable materials, invest in the community, and still make a profit. It turned out that treating people with dignity was a solid business strategy. Our retention rates were the highest in the industry. Our brand loyalty was cult-like. We were making money, but the money felt clean. I spent the morning reviewing the scholarship fund I had established for homeless youth. We had sent 10 kids to college this semester. 10 kids who, like me, had once thought their lives were over. At lunch, I decided to walk to a nearby deli. I liked walking the streets now. I no longer felt invisible, nor did I feel the need to hide behind the persona of a billionaire. I was just Charles. As I turned the corner, I saw him. He was sitting on a crate near a subway entrance, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Please help." He was gaunt, his skin gray and unshaven. His suit was expensive, but stained and torn at the seams. He looked at the pavement, unable to meet the eyes of the passers-by who ignored him. I stopped. I knew that face. It was the former chief city inspector. The man who had taken the bribe from Richard in the diner. The man who had agreed to sign a safety certificate for a death trap in exchange for an envelope of cash. When the scandal broke, he lost everything. His pension, his reputation, his family. He was indicted, served 18 months, and came out to a world that had no place for him. I stood over him. He saw my shoes, simple, sturdy leather boots, and slowly looked up. Recognition dawned in his eyes. He flinched, shrinking back against the cold brick wall. "Mr. Garcia," he rasped. His voice was a shadow of the arrogant tone he had used in the diner. He expected me to spit on him. He expected me to laugh. He prepared himself for the final humiliation. I looked at him. I remembered the rage I felt when I heard the recording of him selling out human lives. I remembered wanting to destroy every single person who had enabled Richard Vance. But then I remembered the soup. I remembered the coat. I remembered Ben dying of cancer, choosing to see the human beneath the filth. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out $100 bill. Charity without purpose is just another form of condescension. I pulled out a business card and a voucher for the cafeteria at the Benjamin. I crouched down. "We have a job placement program," I said, holding out the items. "It starts with sweeping floors. It pays minimum wage. But it comes with a hot meal and a bed in the shelter." He stared at the card. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely take it. "Why?" he whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "After what I did?" I stood up. "Because someone once gave me a coat when I did not deserve it," I said. "And because if I leave you here, I am no better than the man I used to be." I walked away. I did not look back to see if he took the card. That was his choice. I could offer the ladder, but he had to be the one to climb it. I walked to the park across from the office. I needed a moment to breathe. The air was crisp, smelling of impending spring. Sitting on a bench, sketching furiously in a battered notebook, was a young woman. She looked about 22, dressed in thrift store clothes that were stylishly put together. She was chewing on the end of her pencil, her brow furrowed in concentration. I glanced at her sketch as I passed. I stopped. It was a drawing of the old public library down the street, but she had reimagined it. She had opened up the facade with glass arches flooding the gloomy interior with light, connecting the reading rooms to the street life outside. It was bold. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of idea I would have had 20 years ago. "That is a lot of glass for a load-bearing wall," I commented. She looked up, startled. She shielded the drawing, defensive. "It is reinforced polycarbonate," she said quickly. "And I moved the support columns to the interior atrium. It works," I smiled. She knew her structure. "Are you an architecture student?" I asked. She sighed, closing the book. I had to drop out. Tuition went up and my scholarship was cut. Now I work at the coffee shop on 3rd. She looked at the building across the street. The Benjamin. "I wanted to work there," she said, pointing to my building. "I applied for an internship 3 times, but they said I did not have the degree." I looked at her. I saw the hunger. I saw the talent that was being suffocated by circumstance. I saw the future. "Let me see that notebook," I said. She hesitated, then handed it to me. I flipped through the pages. It was raw, yes, unrefined. But the vision was there. She understood space. She understood how people moved through a city. I took out a pen from my pocket, a fountain pen, the same one I had used to sign the demolition order for the Millennium Tower. I wrote a name and a number on the inside cover of her notebook. "Go to the HR department on the 2nd floor," I said, handing it back. "Ask for Sarah. Tell her Charles sent you." "Charles?" She frowned. "Charles who?" "Just Charles," I said. "Tell her you are the new junior apprentice. We will pay for you to finish your degree at night." Her mouth fell open. "You are Charles Garcia?" I smiled. "Keep the columns on the interior," I said. "It is a good design." I walked away, leaving her staring at the notebook as if it were a winning lottery ticket. It was the same feeling I had when I found key number 888. The circle was turning. The energy I had received was flowing out, multiplying, creating ripples that would last long after I was gone. I returned to the Sterling headquarters as the sun began to set. I took the private elevator to the roof. This was my sanctuary. It was a garden in the sky filled with hardy shrubs and wildflowers. In the center stood a simple stone bench. I walked to the edge and looked out over New York. The city was washing itself in the violet hues of twilight. Lights were flickering on millions of tiny stars in a constellation of concrete. I was alone, but I was not lonely. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. The intake center just called. The former inspector checked in. And the girl, Maya. She is here. She is crying. She says thank you. I put the phone away. I thought about Richard. He was alive, sitting in his cell, staring at a blank wall. He had his life, but he had nothing. He was the poorest man on earth. I thought about Elena. She had 3 years left on her sentence. I genuinely hoped that she was using the time to find herself. I thought about Ben. I reached into my jacket and touched the letter he had left me. The paper was worn soft from how many times I had read it. He had given me an empire, but that was the least of his gifts. He had given me a compass. He had taught me that true power is not about how much you can hoard, but how much you can give away. It is not about building towers that scrape the sky. It is about building foundations that lift people out of the mud. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air. The wind ruffled my hair. I felt light. I felt clean. I looked at the horizon where the sun was dipping below the Hudson River, painting the water in strokes of gold and fire. The sweetest revenge is not destroying your enemies, I said to the wind, my voice quiet but steady. It is living a brilliant life that they can never touch. It is taking the stones they threw at you and building a bridge for someone else. I smiled a genuine smile that reached my eyes. Thank you, Ben. I turned and walked back toward the door. The city was waiting. There were more sketches to draw, more lives to change, more work to do. My shift was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Charles's journey from the depths of despair to the heights of redemption resonated with you. Now I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from right now? Are you on a bus in London, taking a break in Tokyo, or relaxing at home in Texas? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and your thoughts on the ending. It is always amazing to see how our community connects from all corners of the globe. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Calm Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to help us grow, and if you really want to support the channel, press the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay safe, and remember, kindness is the ultimate power.